9715.
Guten Tag for all our German listeners out there. Just kidding. I don't even know if we have any German listeners. Anyway, welcome to Bigfoot for Breakfast, home of the mysterious and the macabre, where we sit in the studio every week challenging conventional thought. We are your hosts, Sarah Jones
and Samantha Carter.
So we say this every time, but we are really, really happy that you are back to hang out with us for yet another episode of The Weird and Strange because, as usual, we have a story for you. And not just any story. A story that is truly the thing of nightmares. But first and foremost, we want to take a second to say thank you to everyone who has been following the show. We really hope that you enjoyed it so far, and please don't go anywhere because we have a lot of new and equally creepy episodes for you in the coming weeks. We are really happy with the way that the show has been progressing, and it has a lot to do with you guys who are helping us along the way, suggesting us to friends and family, sharing us on social media, and participating in our contests, and we appreciate that very much.
If you're new to the show, please don't forget to push that subscribe button on whichever app you're listening from, and leave us a comment and a review to let us know how we're doing. If you're new to the show, please don't forget to push that subscribe button on whichever app you're listening from, and leave us a comment and a review to let us know how we're doing. We do read every one of them, and they're very helpful in promoting Bigfoot for Breakfast as well. Speaking of podcast apps, we have had a few people tell us that they try to listen and it shuts down periodically. We think that we've kind of got that figured out, and for the people who click the link on Facebook and listen to the show through the Libsyn feed, if your phone times out and shuts off, the podcast that you're listening to will as well. So it's really best to download whichever app you want to listen to podcasts on and play them through one of those so this does not happen. So, if you're one of the people that's having trouble with that, try that out and see if it helps.
So we've said before, Bigfoot for Breakfast now has a phone number where you can call and leave a message for us, and we'll play the message that we find on there during the show. The number to call is 641-812-2635. So if you have something that you want to say, just give us a call, and we'd really love to hear from you. Let us know how we're doing, if you like the show, if there are any improvements that we can make, any relatable stories that you may have, anything. The number again is 641-812-2635.
We also want to announce our February contest really quick. You can win a free t-shirt or a black glitter coffee mug with the Bigfoot for Breakfast logo on it by doing one of two things. Leave us a rating and a review on whichever podcast app that you listen from, or go onto the Bigfoot for Breakfast Facebook page, go to Invite Friends, and invite any friends that you think would be interested in our show. After you do either one, screenshot it and put it in the comments of the contest announcement on Facebook. And that's it. After you post your screenshot, you will be entered into the contest, and we will draw 2 names on February 29th, because it's a leap year, to see who won.
Now that all the business is out of the way, let's talk about the subject at hand. There isn't a town or area, large or small, that doesn't have its share of dark and mysterious storyline to go along with it. It's been done since the beginning of time. Storytelling is an age-old practice, and a lot of it is purely fiction, providing entertainment value in a time when there wasn't much else to do. Times before television and the internet chipped away at our imaginations. A lot of stories are told that serve a purpose.
There are tales that are told by neighborhood children to scare one another, daring you to walk up to that scary house where everyone knows something frightening waits beyond the door. Or you've just made up something frightening to scare all your friends and it happens to stick. True story. Because nothing scary actually really happened here, I don't think.
Happened where?
Here, where we live. But there's a bunch of broke down houses that we made up stories about.
Oh yeah.
So anyway, you walk up slowly to the front steps, holding your breath, and praying that nobody pulls you inside, or that the kids can't tell that you're scared to death, hoping that you'll survive the knock and run unscathed, and that you'll be able to celebrate the insane bragging rights you've earned by taking the dare and successfully executing the task. Other stories are told by adults to keep children out of places that they aren't supposed to be, or even teach them a lesson of some sort. Fables in a way. Hannibal is at the gate.
I remember when I lived at my old house, and it was surrounded kind of like on the south side, it was all timber with this big drop off of creek. And then on the east side, it was all cornfield. And then the other side was more creek drop off. And then the other side was a highway. And I used to tell my kids that there were monsters in the corn and in the woods so that they'd be too scared to go into them. So I totally believe this happens a lot.
Technically there was, considering there was mountain lions out there that were eating the neighbor's cattle.
Well, they ate the neighbor's cats.
No.
They were scared they would eat the cattle. They were stalking the cattle. Parents would tell their children that monsters would lurk in dangerous places that they didn't want them to wander into, or that their nose would grow inches for every time they told a lie.
Or you'd get blind if you sat too close to the TV. If you make that face, it's gonna stick.
Is that what happened to your face?
Yep. I made this face too much. It's called RBF. I'm angry.
You look unnecessarily perturbed.
My daughter was born with it too. She says, "Thanks for the RBF, Mom."
Although, to most of us, these urban legends have some sort of truthful origination to them. It typically only serves the purpose of making the story more believable. Many kids know the fears that have been created in their hearts from stories like this all too well. But deep down, it's also known that even though it's scary, it isn't completely true. But what if you found out that the story that you grew up hearing, whether you ignored the warnings or you didn't, turned out to be real? Wouldn't you be horrified to realize that this awful danger could have been your own? That it could have reached out and touched you at any moment like a shadowy hand reaching out of nowhere and plucking you painfully from everything that you knew and loved? Well, in the community of Staten Island, New York, that is exactly what happened.
We also want to take a few minutes to let you in on some recommendations that we have for some other shows. We know a few that may pique your interest. The Question Everything guys, Semper Fi Rob, Sean, and the Mick host a show where they pick a different topic every week that usually seems to coincide with issues that we seem to be facing at the time as American people, and they discuss it. They usually do a Facebook Live every Saturday, and then they'll post the edited version to the podcast platforms a few days later. They also take call-ins from guests who have anything to say regarding the topic that week. So if you can relate in some way or have an opinion, get on their Facebook Live and give them a call and chat them up for a while.
MWP is another show that you guys should check out. Chach and Josh are funny and their conversations flow really well. They talk a lot about movies, wrestling, politics, whatever else comes up through the episode, with a lot of jokes and a lot of great personality. So check them out. You won't regret it.
The Kensington Corner with Tom and Jeff is another great show. They tackle the problems of the world one thing at a time, but they focus a lot on health and overall well-being, both mentally and physically, from a man's standpoint. And we found their show to be really interesting because they aren't afraid to really get into the everyday struggles that guys face, especially with mental health and stress. It's a really honest show, and one of them is a veteran, so they promote various causes associated with the mental health of veterans as well, which we think is incredible because it's a very important topic and our nation's veterans don't get the love and support that they deserve. Any conversation that can be had about how to improve that is fantastic. It seems sensible to start at the very beginning, at the origination of the supposed urban legend, if you will. Oh, I will.
You're darn right we will.
Willowbrook State School. Now, This episode is not about Willowbrook specifically, but around the stories that came from it and the terrifying truth that surrounded what most thought was a legend. But in order to tell a story effectively, we find it best to start here, at the beginning. Willowbrook was opened up just after World War II as a school for the mentally impaired. It was 1947 and they admitted 20 mentally disabled children who had been housed in other institutions upstate. You have to keep in mind that this was the 40s and the mentally disabled were not treated with the type of care that is expected today. Today it seems like the goal would be to teach them as much as possible in order to make them as self-sufficient as possible so that they can go on to lead fulfilling lives that they want to lead. And a lot of times, this is totally achievable. But back then, people who were different than the large part of society were written off quickly and tucked away somewhere out of sight. Acclimation into everyday society wasn't really thought to be an option, sadly. Progressive ignorance is how I think of it.
So the school opened in 1947, and of course, by 1955, what do you think we have? A short 8 years later, it's another understaffed mental hospital housing patients beyond capacity. It's overrun with patients and disease, and filthy living conditions are absolutely rampant. Hepatitis was everywhere, and the measles were killing patients left and right. It's referred to as a school, but really, there was very little curriculum or structure to speak of. Due to understaffing and overwhelming number of patients, neglect was pretty much commonplace. The more unruly patients were locked up and walked the halls in soiled clothing, if any at all. Sexual and physical abuse was also commonplace because there was no one around to stop it. This abuse went on between patients and at the hands of staff. constantly. It's kind of like a Trans-Allegheny-esque type place, except
like a smaller scale.
It was kids.
Yeah.
Well, it turned out to be adults later, but it started off as children.
Well, I mean, there were plenty of children at Trans-Allegheny as well.
Yeah.
For the most part, the situation was mostly unknown by the American people, except for maybe visiting family members who came to see their loved ones at Willowbrook. But, of course, they wouldn't say too much about it because that would mean they would have to take back their loved one along with all of their needs, and it was easier to just leave them there and forget about it. The conditions there were introduced, though, one time in a speech made by Robert Kennedy, who said, "I've visited the state institutions for the mentally retarded. And I think particularly at Willowbrook, we have a situation that borders on a snake pit. Still, nothing was done about it until a couple of people decided to go see for themselves what was going on within the walls of the infamous school in question. An employee contacted a local news reporter by the name of Geraldo Rivera. Have you heard of him, or are we just showing our age? He brought along a fellow journalist named Jane Curtin to check things out. The employee who contacted them gave them a key to the facility, and Rivera and Curtin snuck right into the place with a cameraman in tow. That's what I'd have done. Yeah. Can't do that now.
No, you can't.
This unannounced, recorded surprise visit gave them a raw, unfiltered look at the everyday goings-on here, and it was absolutely deplorable.
Also, I don't think I mentioned it in here, but the employee that gave them the key was actually one of the doctors. They were upset.
Good doctor.
Yeah. I guess they felt like they were outweighed. Some of the residents were interviewed by Geraldo, and they told of the neglect, the beatings, the sexual abuse, everything that went on within the walls of this place. And not only were the patients mistreated, misdiagnosed, and ignored within the school seemed to have been ignored by the outside world, leaving them feeling hopeless. And of course, with every horribly run and neglected mental health facility from the past, there was the tired cliche of the awful, misguided doctors who stepped up to run them. Willowbrook was under the eye of one Dr. Saul Krugman, who decided to use the unwilling and unknowing patients here in a study that would hopefully allow him to develop a treatment for hepatitis. Started out noble, right? He would literally inject the feces of the infected patients into the food in order to infect other patients as well. This allowed him to constantly study the disease in different recorded stages. Absolutely horrible. This Dr. Krugman never went to jail for what he did because a few high-profile people came straight to his aid, talking about all of the progress that he made in the medical field, which is really true, but at what cost? He defended this treatment of people until the day he died in 1995, and the entire thing caused him very little trouble.
Finally, the school was completely shut down in 1987, and for a long time, the building stood mostly empty, along with the large amounts of tunnels that ran underneath it. Ooh, I love tunnels.
Most of those old buildings had them.
Are they still there? Are the buildings still there?
Yeah. They're really...
So, we need to go.
I think it's all private property.
Because I love tunnels.
I don't think we can go in there.
I need to make a call.
There's a documentary called Cropsey. We'll talk about that in a little bit, and it shows... They're just super run down, and I think they're taped off because they're unsafe. And I think half the tunnels, it sounded like we're kind of caved in, and so I think they don't let people.
I want to Geraldo Rivera it.
Okay, well, don't admit it on here because they could go back and use it as evidence.
You just got Geraldo'd. Anyway, in the name of science.
Social experiment.
It was surrounded by woods, so this huge, empty, run-down, scary-looking former mental health institution was bound to eventually get a bad rap, and some scary stories were destined to form around it. So the biggest story to come from the old abandoned school was that of Cropsey. I'm just going to say right now that it was very difficult to find much of the history on the actual legend itself, but after scouring the internet, we did find an article called Cropsey at Camp, written by a woman named Libby Tucker for The Voices magazine that is published by the New York Folklore Foundation. Folklore! Shout out, Mick. It was immensely helpful and a good read for anyone who is interested.
For the most part, everyone kind of tells the same story. There's a man by the name of George Cropsey. George was said to have been an affluent, intelligent man, typically a lawyer, a doctor, or some other reputable profession. He tragically and senselessly lost some close family members, usually his wife and children.
Often it is said that a camper from the nearby woods carelessly left a fire ablaze and unattended. The fire spread through the woods to George Cropsey's house, lighting it on fire. The man's children and wife were killed in the blaze, and this left him transformed from the calm, respectable man that he once was to a vengeful psychopath who ended up residing within the walls of the Willowbrook school that later turned into more of a mental hospital. It is told that Cropsy had escaped the confines of the place and took to living in the woods, remaining in the area all of this time. He was taking any opportunity that he could find to exact revenge on any unsuspecting campers in the area. Campers turn up missing here and there, or are found to have been murdered in the woods with a message left on them from Cropsy, often in the form of his name being burned somewhere on the body like a brand on cattle.
A lot of versions of the story put Cropsy coming out mostly on the anniversary of the death of his loved ones, and then a camp counselor or adult will chuckle, and guess what tonight is? Ultimately revealing that this night is in fact that anniversary. Hope he doesn't decide to drop by. They will then leave the children terrified for the night to fend off the manipulation of their own creeped out imaginations. Pretty typical.
Hope you don't die.
For real.
The stories told often make Cropsy seem invincible or uncatchable. Aren't they all?
He reminds me of Michael Myers.
Right? Or Jason Voorhees.
Yeah.
He would often be said to have been injured by the camp counselors who would carry weapons just in case they came in contact with him. One story tells of a counselor hitting him with a hatchet, and another of a police officer shooting him several times with seemingly no effect on him, and he escapes these narrow interactions every single time. This part of the story seems to give it an even scarier, more supernatural twist. To a child, Cropsy seems unstoppable and terrifying, looking at all of the times that they killed off Michael Myers in Halloween, but we all know he's going to be back around.
It sounds like there are a few minor variations of the Cropsy legend. Like we said before, in some versions he carries a knife, in others he wields an axe, and in others he has a hook for a hand. But stories don't only vary according to what kind of weapons he brings to the party.
It does not sound like a party.
It does not. There are several versions of what he was as well. He's reported in several different forms. A human man with a burned face, a masked man, a demon pulled straight from the depths of hell, and a ghost. These are all the versions that I could find anyway.
When we were in elementary school in Texas, I remember there was woods behind the playground, and the legend there was the Goat Man. Did you ever hear that?
I don't remember it.
Yeah, they always talked about that the Goat Man lived in the woods, and he would pick children from the playground. So we were always,
those Southerners would make it a Goat Man.
We were always standing at the playground waiting for the Goat Man to come pick us off. Maybe that was just my little group of friends.
I don't know. I somewhat remember that. Vaguely, but not really.
It stuck with me. So
it must have. Now there really is a Goat Man of Pope Lick.
Yeah.
We'll have to talk about him at some point. It's not a man, it's the devil.
One version of the story listed in Libby Tucker's article stated that he was the one who killed his family. He just went crazy one day and took out his whole family and then moved to the woods. It happens.
It does happen.
Unfortunately, it happens all the time. Some versions throw in the extras like, if you come home after a hike to find a red leaf under your pillow or an X on your pillow, you will die that night, no matter what.
That is a good storytelling voice that you got.
Was it?
Yep. It was very ominous.
In the name of science. No.
Anywho.
I've been working on my voice acting.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
How's it going?
So my daughter plays video games, and one of the things that she likes to do is when there's words on the screen, she does all the character voices different. Her aspiration in life is to go into acting, but she also sings, and she uses that as an excuse to convince me to let her play video games. Mom, I'm working on my future. I'm practicing my voice acting. I'm developing my talent.
So the other day she was here, and the other kids were all upstairs, and she was downstairs playing something. And in the living room, I could hear her talking. And then I heard another child talking. And I was like, who is she talking to? Because it doesn't sound like any of the other children.
It was her.
This went on for a little while, and I'm like, who is in there? And I went in the living room, and she's there by herself. And she looks straight at me, and she says, it's fine.
It's fine. Just ignore it.
And I was like, okay, then.
We've learned to just ignore it in my house. Yet another girl who attended a nearby camp states that she was told the story of Cropsy, but that he wasn't a man at all. He was a little boy who had died at the camp while he was trying to swing from the rafters of the bunk and was subsequently buried beneath the floorboards of the cabin there. If you stand in this particular cabin and say the name Cropsey 3 times, he will appear and kill you.
This version takes on some elements of some other urban legends that I'm sure we've all heard about, like Bloody Mary. Despite this tale being, wasn't there a movie too, Candyman?
Candyman. Candy cane.
That movie freaked me out.
That did freak me out.
What was that called?
It was something about a trucker.
And Paul Walker was in it.
Yes, that was creepy.
It was a good one. Anyway, despite this tale being but a harmless urban legend, people did report hearing strange whispers, voices, and scary laughter throughout the woods as they spent time in them. I don't know if this is just a carry-on from the legend where some people's imagination got the best of them being alone in the woods and getting inside their own heads, or if people were actually hearing this. The story itself could have originated from camp counselors as a way to keep the more city-oriented children alert in the woods of Staten Island and not to wander off alone. Or it could have served as a reminder to make sure that we use fire safety when camping there. Who knows? No matter what the situation, the bottom line is, at the end of the story, there's no clear evidence that Cropsey is dead. It's left totally open-ended.
He's like Rusty Shackelford and he just moved away and everybody assumed he died.
Yeah. Well, I don't know.
Rusty Shackelford. Stop using my identity.
He's never found, and the listener is left to wonder where he could be. Likely in the woods, waiting for his next camper.
Of course, with there being an abandoned mental hospital and school for disabled children in the area, naturally, if there was going to be an urban legend about a murderous madman, it would seem reasonable for this to be the place in which he would reside. It is told that he lives within the abandoned tunnels of the Willowbrook school, going out periodically to check the perimeter of the grounds and the woods wielding a small axe and snatching any children that he could find. This story is huge in this area. It's huge.
Yep, it's huge.
It's told at the camps for years, and people grew up terrified and never ever forgetting the story or its warnings.
The thing is, parents actually had a reason to be worried about their children wandering off or venturing into the woods, otherwise known as the Green Belt on Staten Island. Kids had been going missing, and people were reporting strange goings-on out in the timber there. It's pretty well known that some drifters and homeless people had seemed to have set up some sort of makeshift living quarters here and there throughout the quiet, isolated areas in the Erie Woods and in the buildings of the uninhabited Willowbrook School. Now, this isn't super uncommon in largely populated areas. If there's a quiet, wooded area, it's pretty normal to find a homeless camp here and there.
The residentially challenged.
I'm the vertically challenged.
I'm horizontally enhanced.
It took me a second to figure out what you were talking about.
It means I got a big ass. That's what. Anyway.
Good Lord.
Lordy. A former employee at Willowbrook took to the woods after its closing and lived in makeshift campsites here and there within the woods, sticking close around the buildings. He was also found to have intermittently lived within the tunnel system underneath the former school. That's what I'd have done.
Right? Out of the weather.
This man's name was Andre Rand. At Willowbrook, he served as a physical therapist, an orderly, and a janitor.
Now, I forgot to say this earlier. Several sources list him as a physical therapist, and some other places contradict that, and they say he was never a physical therapist, and they don't know why some sources say that. So that's up in the air. I think he was just an orderly.
It's always the janitor. Literally, always the janitor.
Well, in the movies.
He had been in trouble with the law multiple times for crimes against kids, including attempted sexual assault on a 9-year-old. Another time, he stole a bus with 11 kids on it. He bought them food, and then he drove the bus from the YMCA on Staten Island to the Newark Liberty International Airport before he simply got off the bus and walked away, leaving the kids there alone. So he drove and then had time to think about what he had done.
Okay, there was an interview somewhere on the internet where one of the kids, they said that he was totally natural. They just thought he was the bus driver. Mm-hmm. And so the whole time, they didn't even know they were being kidnapped. He took them to a park and he bought them all food and they thought that was just lunch. And someone else interviewed also and said that he kind of seemed like he was trying to scope out where he could take them mm-hmm. and do something to them, but then he kind of realized that there's 11 children, so how are you going to do that? So then he kind of just dropped them off and left them.
Subsequently, he was arrested and he served 10 months in jail for unlawful imprisonment.
Andre Rand did have kind of a tough upbringing. His mother suppled. I always say suppled instead of suffered every single time.
You will suffer. LOTR there.
Yeah. Audrey Rand did have kind of a tough upbringing. His mother suffered from mental health issues and lived very much of her life off and on at the Pilgrim State Asylum in New York. He was actually born with the name Frank Ruchon. Why he came to change his name at some point, we have no idea and couldn't find the answer to that anywhere. It doesn't seem like anybody really knows. There is a documentary out there that was written and produced by a man and a woman, both from Staten Island, who had grown up with the legend of Cropsy themselves. The movie is entitled Cropsy. And if you have any interest in the case of Audrey Rand or the things that we talk about today, we suggest that you also watch this film because it is a very thorough film and it's very informational. They interviewed Audrey Rand's sister briefly, who stated that neither her or her brother Andre were ever physically abused as children or sexually abused, which is strange because a huge majority of cases like this is the situation.
So was she younger?
I don't know if she was younger, but I know that she told I watched that interview. And they kind of caught her in a parking lot, and she was willing to talk to him, but she said that she had had almost no contact with him since they became adults, unless he needed something from her. And she said that their mom was a good mom and that they were properly cared for after their mom was gone, and there was never any abuse at all in there. But she remembers them. They seem like they were close in age.
Was she a single mom?
I think she was, because I really didn't find any information at all on their father. I almost want to say that their father died, but I don't know if that's correct.
I wonder if, because oftentimes if there's abuse going on with one kid, maybe the other, sometimes they're not even aware. I wouldn't discredit that he didn't suffer some form of that. Not to say I'm assuming that there was abuse, but I'm saying it's possible that she just wasn't aware of what was happening.
Or wasn't, really subjected to it.
Exactly.
And
sometimes they focus on one kid. And the other kids don't have a clue.
But, I mean, they were pretty tight-knit. And later on, we kind of describe a theory because there's some statements that are made by Audrey Rand down the line that kind of explain a little bit. I think it was more like the trauma of what happened to his mother. I think it really got to him that she wasn't around because of her mental illness. And also, we mentioned later, Audrey Rand, I mean, obviously mental illness, but he has kind of a low IQ also. He almost sees his mother and himself as defective in society. And I don't know if that had more to do with it. But let's talk about all of the things that Rand is suspected of doing.
The first of the children to go missing on the island was a 5-year-old little girl named Alice Pereira. On July 7th of 1972, she and her brother had been playing in the lobby of a Staten Island apartment building called the Tyson Lane Apartments. Her brother had left her alone for a few minutes. At approximately 3:30 p.m. when he returned, he could not find Alice. The family looked all over the area for her, but by 6:15, when they still hadn't found her, they went ahead and reported her missing. Time ticked by, and searches were performed in the area, but Alice was never found.
Since Alice's parents had been separated, the authorities initially suspected that the father had taken her. He lived in Manhattan, and it didn't take very long before he was completely cleared of any wrongdoing. There were a few witnesses who claimed to have seen her in a local park after she went missing from the lobby. Did she wander off to the park by herself and then meet up with Rand by accident, or did he snatch her right out of the lobby and she was never in the park at all?
They snatching your people up!
We don't know this because although Audrey Rand was the prime suspect, there was really no proof to indict him for anything. The Charlie Project website states that Rand was a suspect because of his past tendencies for molestation and the fact that he was actually working as a painter in the Tyson's Lane apartments at the time when the girl went missing. Little Alice Pereira was never found or seen again.
This is kind of like the rough premise of a Criminal Minds episode.
No, it actually is. I wonder if there isn't one based on Audrey Rand.
Well, I know that they do use previous cases as the basis for
I think most of them do. Yeah. Like, I know SVU, like Law and Order, they do.
Next up is Ethel Atwell, who went missing in 1978. She was actually a physical therapy aide at the Willowbrook school, and this is where Ethel was last seen. She got there at her normal arrival time, 6 a.m., and as she walked from her car to Building 47 of the school, she was attacked. Employees from inside the building could hear a man's voice yelling at her to, "Come on, come on," and they heard Ethel say, "No," and then they heard a scream. They ran outside to see what was going on, but Ethel and her attacker were gone. and due to the lack of illumination in the parking lot, they couldn't see a thing.
It was determined that she had not gotten far from her vehicle because when the cops showed up and searched the parking lot, some of her belongings were found lying on the ground beside her car. These belongings included her wallet, an earring, part of her denture plate, and some buttons from her coat. Her car was still locked, and the keys were found on the ground in the nearby woods. Ethel was never found or seen again, and Audrey Rand has almost always been a suspect in her disappearance.
In 1981, another little girl goes missing. This time, it is 7-year-old Holly Ann Hughes. She had been sent to the local drugstore in Delhi, only 2 blocks down the street from her home, to buy a bar of soap. She was to go there and come straight home. A friend of hers went along with Holly. When Holly never returned home, her friend was questioned. The friend stated that a man wearing some sort of mask pulled up to the girls asking if they would like a piece of candy. The friend thought that the man looked scary and declined, but Holly didn't. She walked right up to the car to get a piece of candy, and the man opened his door. As Holly reached for what she thought was a piece of candy, the man grabbed her arm, pulling her over him and into the passenger seat of the car. He then shut the door and drove away. The child who witnessed all of this happen never got a look at the man's face because of the scary mask that he was wearing. So that's weird. So she just went home and didn't tell anybody that happened?
I don't know. Holly's story kind of differs from source to source too, but I think she did go find help.
It's kind of weird though that he's accused of these different, usually if you're a child offender, you don't progress to adult. There's no
We kind of talk about that too.
Okay.
Audrey Rand was more like an opportunistic guy, and I think that children just happened to be easier, but then he found himself in situations too where he was like, hey, there's an adult and it's easy too. I think it was just, he went after children mostly just because they were easy, but he wasn't really that discriminatory.
But that's weird.
Yeah.
That's weird.
But he was always so scared of getting caught. But then he did that right in the middle. But 9:30 at night, he probably didn't think that anyone would really see it. As reported on the Charlie Project website, which is an online database for missing people, Holly's mother received a phone call about a month after Holly had disappeared. A man who called himself Sal told her that he had been keeping Holly this entire time and that she could have her back. He asked her to meet him at Penn Station in New York City to perform sexual acts on him in exchange for her daughter's safe return. Holly's mother has stated that she didn't believe the man from the start. She felt in her heart that her daughter was already gone and that this man was likely just taking advantage of a desperate situation. Unfortunately, there are people out there like that. However, she did contact the police to let them know what had happened, and they accompanied her to Penn Station to meet the man in question just in case. Of course, Sal was a no-show. Holly was never found or seen again.
Holly's family has always been pretty upset about the way that the investigation was handled from the start. Apparently, there was quite a few witnesses who saw Holly being abducted. Some others had come forward to state that they had seen Audrey Rand's green Volkswagen circling around the neighborhood that day. Still others came forward stating that they saw Holly in Rand's Volkswagen. It is stated that initially, the claims were largely ignored by the police. The neighborhood wasn't really a good one demographically. It was poor and run down, so most of the witnesses who had come forward to tell what they saw were not reputable people and had prior convictions themselves.
Holly's brother grew up later on to be a police officer for the Staten Island police, I think, or New York City police, I'm not sure, but he's been extremely active in her case and instrumental in some of the later charges that were brought to Audrey Rand. So he was pretty awesome. He fought for his sister forever. I think he was a teenager when she went missing, or at least like a young teenager. Next to disappear was a couple of years later in 1983. This girl was 11 years old and her name was Thais Jackson. Thais and her family were living in Mariners Harbor Motel on Staten Island. The family's house had recently burned down and they were staying in this hotel until they were ready to move south as they had planned to do. According to the Charlie Project website, it was about 1:30 in the afternoon and Thais was asked by another hotel resident to go to the store and grab some groceries for them, and Thais agreed. When Thais was asked to do this, her mother was sleeping, so she had no idea that Thais had even left the residence.
When her mother woke up, she started looking for Thais and was then told that she had left 3 hours ago and that Thais had not yet returned. Obviously, her mother became very concerned and called the police immediately. Her mother stated that she is not typically someone who would just go up to strangers, as she is used to being out on the streets of New York City, so she was considered to be a pretty streetwise girl. Of course, the mother was looked at pretty hard by police, and so was Thais's uncle, who also lived at the hotel. Both relatives took and passed polygraph tests, and they were quickly ruled out as suspects in her disappearance.
Audrey Rand was an initial prime suspect in the case of Thais Jackson. Reportedly, she was last seen on August 14th, and this was only 12 days after Andre Rand was done serving his prison sentence for the incident with the school bus. Rand also had a campsite that was within the immediate vicinity of this hotel, and he had been supposedly seen loitering outside in the hotel parking lot earlier that day. Not enough evidence was found to have brought charges against anyone, and 11-year-old Thais Jackson was never found or seen again.
The following year, in 1984, a man named Hank Gafforio disappeared. He was 22 years old and was reported to have had a low IQ and borderline MR. He was last seen at the Spa Lounge on Staten Island after a night of drinking, and it was 4 a.m. He was said to have been turned away from at least one bar that night, so I'm assuming that he had been drinking pretty heavily.
Now, this doesn't seem to fit the bill, right? Most of the other disappearances had been little girls, and believe it or not, Rand was questioned in all of these cases, but no charges were ever brought because the children were never found, and there was never sufficient evidence to bring the charges. But what made the authorities think that Rand had been involved in the case of missing Hank Gafforio? Well, Hank was last seen by several witnesses eating breakfast with Andre Rand at a local diner early the morning he went missing. So it sounds like he was out at bars, he was drinking, it was 4 a.m., he maybe met up with Rand and Rand bought him breakfast. Rand also would have likely known Gafforio because before Andre Rand was homeless, he lived only a few houses down from where Hank Gafforio grew up. Hank was never found or seen again.
You're listening to the Prescribed Films Podcast Network, home to hundreds of hours of free podcast entertainment. The shows on this network all have a common goal, providing you with the best discussions about movies and other forms of entertainment media. The PFPN hopes to fill your earholes with audio joy. Visit our website with links to all the other amazing shows at www.thepfpn.com. Thanks for listening.
In 1987, a little girl goes missing, and this is where things take a bit of a turn. The girl's name was Jennifer Schweiger, and she is a 12-year-old little girl with Down syndrome. Jennifer was actually seen walking with Andre Rand just before she went missing. A 35-day search of the woods around Willowbrook School turned up a strange-looking spot that was noticed by one of the local retired firefighters named George Kramer. He didn't dig there immediately. Instead, he went to get the police, who gently started digging in the area. Smart George. Oh my gosh, somebody did something right in an investigation.
Sometimes there are those people.
Oh, George.
Who think?
It didn't take long before something was unearthed. George reports that pretty soon he looked over at the dig site and saw a small child's foot poking out of the ground. He reports that just that sight will haunt him for the rest of his life. Little Jennifer had been killed and discarded in a shallow grave in the woods within 100 yards of Andre Rand's makeshift campsite.
I don't know what would be worse, like knowing that your child died like that or that they were just gone.
I honestly 100% believe I would rather the closure.
I think so too. Ugh, even though
unfortunately, but having the hope of continuing to look for her, but never, but then never finding them, I
think in your heart as a mother, even if you did think that that's probably what happened, if I never found my child, I would always feel in my heart that they were still alive.
I would totally be Noreen Gosh.
I would too. At this time, Andre Rand was located, and he was arrested for the murder of Jennifer Schweiger. In 1988, he went on trial, and the jury seemed to be at some sort of impasse regarding evidence, I guess, because they ended up charging Rand with the kidnapping of Jennifer Schweiger, but they didn't convict him of murder.
What?
Well, I'm not sure. He had the witnesses saying that they kidnapped him, but I don't know why they didn't have the evidence, I guess, that said that he murdered her. I don't know. I'm not sure what the deal is with that. If they believe that he was responsible for her kidnapping on that day, why would he not be found guilty of her murder as well? I'm not sure where they lacked evidence there, but they must have.
According to the documentary Cropsey and an interview within the film, one key person in bringing Rand to trial in the investigation was a Pastor Musket. He was a local man who was asked by the police to house Audrey Rand for a time to see if he would trust the pastor enough to say anything. At the risk of his family and wanting to help bring Jennifer Schweiger's murderer to justice, he nervously agreed to do so. The police had bugged the house and kept a surveillance car outside of the house 24/7 to keep the family safe.
In the time that Rand was in the pastor's home, he states that Rand told him that he took Jennifer. Rand stated to him that he felt that she was unwanted by her family due to her Down syndrome diagnosis, and that he didn't feel that people who had any sort of mental handicap should remain alive.
How is that not? I mean, it's circumstantial at best, but come on.
I mean, he's a mentally handicapped guy, so I don't know if he was just kind of projecting his own feelings of himself onto other people. He felt that Jennifer was alone. I don't know if we said it before, but most of the children that had gone missing and were linked in one way or another to Rand did have some sort of mental disability. So that does seem coincidental that this would be the case, and then he would be said to have made a statement like this. Maybe in a strange way he felt that he was sparing these children. It makes a person wonder if the fact that he grew up with a mother who dealt with a mental illness had a more profound effect on him than initially thought.
Now remember, the whole city of Staten Island was pretty sold on the idea that Rand had killed this girl. And Pastor Musket couldn't tell anyone that he was working with the police for fear that Rand would find out and leave. So people just thought that he was housing him out of the kindness of his heart, and took this as the pastor defending Rand's supposed actions, when this really wasn't the case. The good pastor took some hits during this time. They ended up moving to Pennsylvania as a result of the negative light in which this action put his family.
He had some angry New Yorkers. Some angry Staten Island New Yorkers.
You don't want to mess with them.
Especially when something's been done to one of them.
Yeah.
It was kind of a sad deal for the pastor. Really. Because he was trying to help.
Yeah, he did make a big sacrifice.
I've read a few times that Audrey Rand had some mental disabilities himself. I'm really not sure to what extent his deficits were, but he definitely gives a negative vibe in his photos. There is a photo from his 1988 trial that is black and white. It can be found easily on the interwebs with a quick Google. Rand is being led down the courthouse stairs by what appear to be officers or detectives. He's looking down almost as if he is catatonic, and there is a large string of drool coming from his mouth dripping onto his shirt.
So they probably had him sedated, like on drugs.
I don't know.
Maybe. I don't know.
It doesn't say. In other photos, his face seems almost sunken in around the mouth, and he's balding and has large bulging eyes.
Obviously, if people thought that Rand had killed Jennifer, they could only speculate that he was likely responsible for the disappearance of the other children as well. He was seen with most of them just prior to their going missing, and was obviously out looking for children to victimize, so it seems reasonable. There are people who walk the green belt of Staten Island to this day looking for odd-looking patches of ground and subsequently digging them up trying to locate some of the other bodies so that their families might have a bit of closure. Obviously, you should not be digging up things when you're investigating them yourself. You put them at risk for compromising evidence, and then when they go to trial, they say, well, how do we know that this evidence wasn't placed by this other person? A reasonable doubt, and they're not going to be able to convict him anyway. Don't do those things.
But I think at this point, we'll get to that. Rand, he's already kind of taken care of. So I think they're not worried about evidence as much as just trying to find the bodies for the families.
Well, anyway, so far nothing else has turned up.
There was another girl who went missing that many people think disappeared at the hands of Audrey Rand, but her situation was quite a bit different than the others. And a lot of people feel that he wasn't to blame. We will go ahead and include her here because she is at least mentioned in several articles as being one of his suspected victims. Her name was Audrey Nirenberg, and if she was taken by Rand, she would have actually been one of his first and earliest kidnappings. Audrey disappeared in 1977 at 15 years old. She was a disorganized schizophrenic with a history of hospitalizations due to her illness. Of course, it was first speculated that Audrey may have just walked out of her home disoriented, but her parents have repeatedly stated that she was doing very well on her medication at the time, and she would frequently leave on her own to do normal teenager things and return just fine. She had no history of running away from home, and she had a good relationship with her parents.
The night before her disappearance, She and her family had been to Staten Island, where Rand lived, to see a movie. The theater that she had been to was in very close proximity to Rand's residence and hunting grounds. But Audrey went home with her parents that night, off of the island. So why do people think that Rand may have taken her? Because one of the symptoms of her conditions is that she frequently repeats things that she had recently done. It is thought that she may have gotten on a boat and went back to Staten Island, coming into contact with Audrey Rand then.
There was, however, a couple of other suspects in this case that seem reasonable as well. 5 years after Audrey's disappearance, a friend of her brother was sentenced to 18 years for stabbing another woman. Thankfully, this woman did survive. He lived a block away from where Audrey had last been spotted and never went back to her parents' house again after her disappearance. After he was convicted of stabbing the other woman, he was asked to participate in a polygraph examination in which he would be asked questions in relation to the disappearance of Audrey. He declined this test.
Case closed.
Yeah, kinda. Some people are scared of polygraph tests that do turn out to be innocent just because there are a lot of false.
Yeah. Another man suspected in her disappearance was the owner of a local ice cream parlor. She had accused him of raping her. He called her a liar and told the police that the two did have sex, but that it was consensual. There was no proof and no charges were ever filed. Since Audrey vanished, though, mysteriously, there is now a large spot on the wall of the ice cream parlor that has been cemented up without explanation. It is obviously speculated that this is where Audrey is, but once again, no charges were brought because they had no proof that he was anywhere near her when she went missing. The parlor owner sold the shop and moved away only 3 months after her disappearance. And they didn't break down the wall?
Well, if you don't have, you have to ask for permission to go do stuff like that. And if he said no, and there was no other real proof that he was involved, then they can't just go break his wall.
But why wouldn't the new owner give him permission?
That's what I was wondering too. I don't know. I never found any information on that. Because if I was the new owner, I would break the wall.
Break the wall.
But not everyone's like that.
Yeah, that's true.
Even though none of the other bodies have been located, that did not stop authorities from bringing Rand to trial again in 2004. This time for the kidnapping of 7-year-old Holly Ann Hughes. 23 years had gone by since her disappearance, but luckily in New York, there's no statute of limitations for kidnapping or murder, so the trial went on as planned. When the police did finally investigate Rand in the case, it may have been too late. This is at the time when she went missing. Quite a bit of time had passed, and when they did search his makeshift residence and his car, they found nothing. But since being incarcerated for Jennifer Schweiger's kidnapping, he's been heard bragging multiple times about the sexual things that he has accomplished with many children, often compares himself to Ted Bundy.
Holly Ann Hughes' mother was the one who received that phone call from a man who called himself Sal, remember? When Rand was arrested, she identified his voice as the same one from the phone call. Those witnesses, who were mostly ignored before, were brought in to testify against Rand that they had seen his car multiple times in the area that night and had seen Holly in his car later. At trial, Rand did admit to having contact with Holly. He said that he played a hide-and-seek game with her, and when she came up a nickel short to buy her bar of soap at the deli, he gave her 5 cents to purchase it. Rand was again convicted of kidnapping, but not murder, because they had not found Holly. He was sentenced at this time to another 25 consecutive years to life. Audrey Rand becomes eligible for parole.
He doesn't get to patrol.
Well, he probably will.
Oh, if he gets out.
He'll be dead. Audrey Rand becomes eligible for parole in 2037, and he will be 93 years old. Deny it.
Twice a year, volunteers still go back to the area to comb it over for clues and evidence related to the other victims that may be tied to Audrey Rand. The legend of Cropsey still lives on among campgoers and local people. So let's get back to the legend itself a little bit more. How did the legend killer get the name Cropsey? It's hard to say. The only name that really comes up in New York history is the famous painter by the name of Jasper Cropsey, who was sickly as a child and taught himself to draw and paint during his time off from school.
Many of the people of Staten Island say that the Cropsey legend has been around for as long as they can remember. The stories of the murderous axe or knife-wielding maniac have been terrifying children and adults alike for years and years. Like we talked about before, the stories likely started out as a cautionary tale. There was a number of factors that created that eerie feeling at the time in Staten Island. The fact that an old, run-down, scary-looking school existed there, and one with such a horrible history at that, was bound to create rumors in the first place. The fact that campers were in the area, so a cautionary creepy tale was created to keep them within the camp boundaries, existed. And last but not least, the fact that children were actually going missing in the area. These are the ingredients that created an aura around the city and its surrounding beautiful landscape.
I have to say a lot of our information that we got from the missing children came from the Charlie Project at www.charlieproject.org. It is a database filled with information on missing children and adults throughout the United States, and it's obvious that it takes quite a bit of work to keep it going. If you're interested in donating to a good cause, go to their website and push the donate button up at the top and make a small contribution to their cause. Resources like this are invaluable and we appreciate them very much.
So that's it for this week's episode of Bigfoot for Breakfast. Make sure that you go onto your favorite podcast app, subscribe to our show.
Your favorite show.
Your favorite show.
Your favorite podcast.
Give us a rating and a review. Share us with your friends. Don't forget to check out our Facebook page. Look for updates, funny memes, and contests, which we will be posting a contest
here shortly. In the next day or so, we'll post this one that we announced today.
And we are going to be drawing for the winner of that contest on Leap Day, February 29th. You're going to win either a Bigfoot for Breakfast t-shirt or a glittery coffee mug.
And all you have to do is go into our Facebook. You can go to the Invite Friends button. Invite as many friends as you want. Anyone that you think might be interested in our show, screenshot it and put it down in the comments beneath the post. You can also go on and leave a review and screenshot that, and that'll count as a contest entry as well. Aside from Facebook, we're also on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. Our TikTok postings will get more interesting. We're just, dipping our toes in the TikTok world, but it looks enticing.
Don't forget to call our voicemail system at 641-812-2635. Leave us a voicemail. Talk to us about the show, things that you would like to hear from us, things that we could do differently, suggestions that you might have, or if you have something to talk about on an interesting topic. We are always happy to hear those stories as well. Also, we love compliments and even the occasional prank, apparently.
We love compliments.
Make sure and check out Attitude Podcast Network on Facebook as well as Prescribed Film Podcast Network for some other cool shows.
Yeah, there's a lot of cool shows on both of those sites. So yeah, definitely check them out. Other than that, I think that's enough news for today.
Bigfoot for Breakfast, out.
Until next week.
Bye!